Welcome, everyone. Would you please rise for the invocation and stay standing for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Heavenly Father, we pray that you let courage fill our hearts, that we may let courage fill our heart, that we may not disappoint those that look for leadership and direction to their concerns. Let us press forward toward the goal, being only concerned with what is best for our community. We pray that you give us guidance and wisdom to do what is right. We ask that you protect our citizens and all our first responders and core employees as they serve our city. Give us courage to make decisions that are in the best interest of those we serve. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible. Again, welcome everybody. I'm calling to order the City of Lee Summit regular session number 32. Can I get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Hodges.
Here.
Councilmember DeMauro.
Here.
Councilmember Pryor. Here. Councilmember Shields.
Here.
Councilmember Felker. Councilmember Lovell. Councilmember Edson.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Lopez.
Here.
Mayor Baird.
Here. Thank you. First item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. I have a motion to adopt the agenda by Councilmember DeMauro, seconded by Councilmember Hodges. Discussion? Seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. It's unanimous. Thank you. Next is the approval of the consent agenda. I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda by Councilmember Edson, seconded by Councilmember Hodges. Discussion? Seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. It's also approved unanimously. Thank you. Next is Council Roundtable. Items of general interest, things going on in the community, your district. Did you go to that very drizzly, hazy, but wonderful St. Patrick's Day Parade? I did.
I was there, Mayor.
Yeah. I saw you. You were drenched. Yes. Councilmember Edson.
Thank you, Mayor. So last week, I mentioned some folks up on the north side of the city who are getting out and volunteering to pick up trash. And this will teach me a lesson because I told them, hey, give me a call. I'll help you pick up trash. So I was out picking up trash Saturday morning and in the rain. And
the cold.
Yeah, I will tell you that there were only 4 of us that day because, you know, the weather was bad. But in less than 2 hours, we picked up 18 bags of trash. Oh, wow. And so I thought that was really impressive. And I'm pretty sure that I was not pulling my weight because I divided up how many that was per person. And I'm pretty sure I was not pulling my weight. Oh. But they meet every Saturday. And now I'm trying to get a little competition going with some other neighborhoods. I'm trying to get them out. We'll see how it works out.
Excellent. Love it. Thank you. Councilmember Pryor.
Thank you, Mayor. So I actually didn't see you guys. I was running a little late at the parade, but I got left behind. I was talking too much, and the people I was with in the red fire truck, they just kept going, and I was by myself. Faith thinks it's funny because all the pictures posted of me, I'm just by myself in the parade. But yeah, it was fun. It was actually surprisingly a good turnout.
Yep.
So.
It was. Okay. Anybody else? All right, then we will get to some business. I'm going to close the regular session and head right into and open our first public hearing in the matter of Ellis Glen LCRA redevelopment plan. Ellis Glen LLC is the applicant. Would all those wishing to speak to this matter please rise and be sworn in by the city clerk? Mr. Bushak.
David Bushak, Chief Counsel of Economic Development and Planning. We'll have the developer's presentation first, and then I will provide my comments after they speak.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you. All right, get the clicker right. Okay. So thank you for your time today. As we make our way through this process, thank you to everybody at the city who's helped us, especially David and Ryan and Scott. We were here in August, if you recall, to receive approval for the zoning and also receive approval to move forward with LCR discussions. Since then, we have finished the blight study, submitted that to you in the materials, and also received approval from the LCRA board. The project developers, Ryan Neighbors of Neighbors Construction, myself, Jennifer Mentz, Scott Miles, and Pam Hatcher. Just a quick note, we are local individuals, so you don't see any out-of-state investors, you don't see any big companies. We have lived in this area for 20 to 45 years. We're definitely impacted by the local community, and we're proud to put this project forward and help improve Lee Summit. The overview, it's around an $8 million project, 8,000 square feet of office space on the first floor. Second two floors have 26 Class A residential residences. The mix is 4 studio, 16 one-bedroom, and 6 two-bedroom. And then we have a rooftop amenity area for the residential tenants. This shows the location. I can't bullet pointer, can I? Okay, anyway. All right, so if you're familiar with this at all, it's Second and Market. Okay. So Second and Market, so this is the city parking, bridge space, the old post office is here, just to give you a feel for where we are. This area all around us is commercial, and we have a picture that shows a little better of the zoning later, and then this area with a lot more trees is residential back there. The reason I point that out is because we do think it makes a really good transition from the commercial area that's downtown. So it's still in the commercial area, and then right behind it is residential. So a mixed-use project, I think, makes a lot of sense. And then if you referenced our blight study by Valridge Property Advisors, it does meet the blight requirements, 2 of them. The first is insanitary or unsafe. So the homes, there are 3 homes and 2 empty lots. The homes are uninhabitable. So I'm just kind of flipping through to show you pictures of the 5 lots. The second blight requirement is deterioration of site improvements. So these houses were put up in the 40s, 1940s. There's really no useful life left in them. Page 45 of the blight study says that by reason of the previously stated blighting factors, the 2 I just mentioned, the study area in its present condition and use constitutes both an economic and social liability, as well as a menace to public health and safety, as defined by Missouri statutes, and I won't rattle off the numbers, but I have them if you like them. Additionally, page 46 of that study says that, but for the use of economic incentives, the study area will most likely remain underdeveloped, causing a social liability due to decreased tax revenue and future development. So now, I'll remind you all what our project looks like. It's very aesthetically pleasing. We designed it to match the look and feel of downtown, and specifically to give it some walkability with those patios. I'm not sure if you can tell, but there are patios out front of the office space that go right up against the sidewalk, so there's that feel of walkability. And then, like I said, there's the 26 residential residences and the 8,000 square feet of office space. We currently have commitments for 2 of the 3 office spaces. Just another vantage point. Our parking, we talked a lot about this in the August zoning meeting, so just an overview. In our charter, when we looked at these 5 lots and started coming up with a development plan, we really wanted to create a mixed-use project because it's important not only to bring tenants but also jobs to downtown area. And so that was our charter. And we wanted to clean up these blighted 5 lots. And also, one benefit that we didn't even anticipate going into this, but because of the stormwater retention requirements, we actually according to the engineers. I'll read it. But we are exceeding the comprehensive control peak flow limits, which results in a significant reduction in peak flow from the site compared to existing conditions. So in a 2-year flood, it decreases the water flow 71%. 10-year flood situation, it reduces it 72%. In a 100-year flood, it reduces it 62%. So hopefully that can help with some of the flooding downhill on Second and to the houses behind the project area. We have our cost overview here. As I said, it's around $8 million. The construction budget's about $6.5 million. Taxes about $252,000. Design, land, and other pre-construction were about $1.2 million. So the total development cost without the taxes is about $7.7. And I mentioned that we did meet with the LCRA board, and they approved our proposal of a tax abatement at 75% for 25 years. Also, sales and use tax exemption. And again, reference back to the blight study that says that this project is similar to other large projects in Lee's Summit that wouldn't be developed without incentives to achieve economic viability. I put this in, this is a map from the 2012 ordinance that declared downtown area to be blighted. Okay, so this is really hard to see, but the next slide will be a little more clear. But if you can see that dotted line, that where that T and Z is, those 5 lots are our lots. And so for some reason, when they did this 2012 blight study, they just went around those 5 lots. I'm not quite sure why. But it is situated right next to commercial. So this you can see is that commercial all around. These, the T and Z, it's that photographer, and I can't think of what else is on that corner. And then the residential behind. So I just wanted to point that out so that you could get a feel for what is in the neighborhood. Okay, and like I said, we got the approval from the LCRA. We explained to them that we do meet all 5 areas to be a priority project, so we talked to them. And of course, they referred us back to you guys. And so this will help you understand a little bit more financially how the economic and social liability is right now. So the blue line is basically as is. So if nothing gets done to these 5 lots, there's really almost no value to the city. You can see that blue line goes up a little over 25 years, but it's extremely minimal. The red line, however, shows that after economic incentives, there's still value added to the city from this project. So not only in terms of personal property tax, sales tax from new residents, new direct and indirect jobs, and then the actual real estate taxes themselves. In addition to being small business owners who are doing the project, we've engaged with as many local small businesses as possible. So this is just a list for you to see. And then as I close, we just want to mention that we do meet 5 of the Lee's Summit specific goals and target outcomes. So I'm sure you've seen this slide. Maybe some of you had something to do with putting it together. But we're helping improve infrastructure, attracting and retaining businesses, eliminating blight, allowing for business retention and expansion, and helping to generate a positive community image. I will leave you with the last slide, which shows the current lots and then our rendition. And then I think I hand it over to David, and of course, we're available for questions after he speaks.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I wanted to go to full screen, but I can't quite do that, so I'll do that version. All right. So I'll start my presentation by entering into the record exhibits 1 through 9.
Please enter exhibits 1 through 9 into the record.
I remembered this time. I won't go through the project itself. The developer's done a fine job of explaining what the project is. I will focus on the economics and some of the policy issues that came up at the LCRA Board of Commissioners meeting. The City Council heard a conceptual presentation of this project back in September and provided positive but non-binding feedback at that time. In October of last year, the City Council approved a rezoning of the property to allow for this project. The plan was presented to the LCRA Board in February of this year, and they voted unanimously to recommend approval of the plan. There were only 3 that eventually voted on it. There was another member who had to leave right before the vote was taken, and he indicated he would vote positively if he could have stayed. So it was a unanimous vote we have 1 vacancy on the LCRA Board at this time. So I will focus on the economics as I usually do for a project like this. And I will start with the abatement request. Their request is a 75% abatement for 25 years, which is the maximum allowed under the Missouri Constitution in a blighted area. So the pilot payments that would flow through to the taxing districts is 25%. The benefit to the taxing districts, what we do is we have a snapshot. We start with the taxes that were generated by these 5 parcels last year, generate about $5,000 in annual taxes. The pilots to the taxing districts in the first year, if the project is approved, is about $41,000, with the city's line highlighted in green. And then the pilots over a 25-year period is about $1.17 million flowing to the taxing districts. So we have nominal taxes flowing with property in its current state versus the substantially increased pilots, even with the 75% abatement. The value of this incentive request to the developer, approximately $8 million project costs. The net present value of the tax abatement they requested, 75% over 25 years, is about $1.7 million, which is about 21.5% of the total project costs. The value of the sales tax exemption is about $232,000, which is about another 3%. So the total value of this incentive is about 24.5%. As we've discussed on many occasions in the past, the range of benefit to a developer for all of the incentives that the City Council has approved over time is between roughly 5 and 25%, with some exceptions both ways. So this is at the higher end of that incentive request, but it is comparable to some projects that the City Council has approved incentives for in the past. Then the statement of the impact and benefit to the city, and I will go into this in a little more detail in a moment, but this is the summary. The real property tax abatement impact to the city is about $600,000. That's due to the 75% property tax abatement. The city sales and use tax exemption as a portion of that whole number up here is about $84,000. But the net pilot benefit to the city, even factoring in those lost revenues, is about $175,000 to the positive as compared to the taxes that would be generated by the property today if it's not redeveloped. Then the next set of spreadsheets I included in the packet, these are all my calculations independent calculations to arrive at these numbers, but I want to focus in on this box. Taxes to all of the taxing districts without the project is about $140,000. The city's portion is about $24,000, so that's if the property stays in its current state, remains undeveloped, and generates the nominal taxes. The pilots to the taxing districts, as I just described, is about $1.17 million. The city's portion of that is about $200,000. So the net increase in taxes to the city, again, is that $175,000. That's the net benefit to the city over the life of the project. Then the last thing I want to show you from this spreadsheet this is essentially a restatement of what I just showed you, but it shows you together the benefit to the developer. This is essentially a restatement of what I just showed you. And then the net benefit to the city, positive $175,000 if the project occurs. There was one particular issue that the LCRA board discussed that I want to talk about for a moment. And it was this, what I think is an interesting policy issue. There was one commissioner, if I were to condense all of the discussion down, it took about 20 or so minutes of that hearing time. The statement that the commissioner was trying to make is this: the LCRA should not be used as an incentive tool to allow for commercial development to make incursions into residential neighborhoods surrounding the downtown core. That's essentially the argument that was being made. And there was a really good debate and discussion about that issue. And the argument was, if we're going to use this tool in the downtown core area, we should be careful not to allow commercial developments, this is sort of my phrasing, my summary of what was said, to make incursions into the established residential neighborhoods around the downtown core. So I want to start with showing you, this is the city zoning map. This is a snapshot from our GIS map that lights up the zoning layer. And you'll see, we start with the downtown core here. Interesting footnote, this is the downtown area that sort of slanted a bit to the compass because of the railroad and how downtown originally developed. But you'll notice the bulk of the downtown area is commercial development. And most of these uses, with maybe a few exceptions here and there, are commercial uses and then institutional uses, the city's uses. The property that we're talking about is over here in this area. So we'll zoom in a little bit. And again, this is another version of a map the developer just showed you. Here's the project property, these 5 lots. And the thing that was discussed at the LCRA board is, you'll notice it's essentially surrounded by commercial zoning. So you've got CP2 across the street, the transitional neighborhood zoning immediately adjacent, and then you've already rezoned this to central business district. That's the CBD nomenclature that's kind of hidden under the address here. So you've already rezoned this property. And I think the argument that was being discussed, the position that was being discussed at the LCRA board was, don't allow the LCRA to be used as a tool to go out into the established residential areas. And so I guess the argument would be, don't use the LCRA to go out in these commercial areas that are already established. But this zoning map highlights that this property arguably does exactly the opposite. It arguably completes what is probably a commercial area given the commercial zoning. And then I'll show you one more map. This is the much better version of a map the developer just showed you. This is the color version of the map that was attached to the 2012 ordinance that the city council approved that declared the bulk of the downtown area to be blighted under the LCRA Act. So the dashed lines, that's the boundaries of the area that the city council has already declared to be blighted in the downtown area. And you'll notice this area, as it stands today, is a notch. This was not included in that original finding. When I first looked at this map after the developer initially presented the project to us, I asked the question, why isn't that included? It's this odd notch. And then you'll notice if you kind of look around the boundaries, there's these other notches. And the answer is, the original version of this map, before it was finally adopted by the city council, did include some of these notches. And it was a conscious decision by the city council at that time to exclude the residential areas that were on the perimeter of the downtown area. So now back to the issue that the LCRA board was discussing, don't use this tool to make incursions into the residential area. We now have a project that is proposed to take what is currently residential, turn it into commercial development. And if you look at the map and think back to at least what my original thought was, why didn't this just include this area? It was residential back then. You've already rezoned it to commercial last year. And so this sort of completes the picture. And I think it avoids the policy issue that the board, the LCRA board was discussing, which is don't use this tool to go out in these established residential areas, which I don't think this does. So I wanted to point out that discussion. I thought it was an interesting discussion that happened at the LCRA board meeting. The last thing that I will comment on are the 3 findings that the city council needs to make to approve any redevelopment plan under the LCRA Act. The first is a blight finding. The only thing I have to say on the blight finding is I'm very confident you can make a legally defensible blight finding on this property, no question. Second finding, conformance with the city's comprehensive plan. The finding needs to be made that the project conforms to the comprehensive plan. I believe you've already done that by approving the rezoning, which is essentially the best evidence we have of your finding that the project is in conformance with the comprehensive plan because you've already approved the rezoning. The last finding is a necessity finding. And I know there may be some question about the necessity finding in the context of this project and the level of abatement that the developer is requesting, so I have a few additional comments about this finding. So let me start with the actual language of the statute, because it's different than any other statutory tools we use for incentives. The language specifically says the city council must find that the redevelopment of the redevelopment area is necessary and in the interests of the public health, safety, morals, and welfare of the residents of the city. We could compare this to the but-for test that's required for tax increment financing. So in the case of tax increment financing, there has to be a very specific finding by the city council that if you don't use TIF, in the case of a TIF request, the project would not happen. That's not what this statute requires. This is a very soft version of that same concept. And again, the specific language is you must find that redevelopment of the redevelopment area is necessary. That means whatever you'd like it to mean, essentially. You have to find that the redevelopment is necessary and in the best interest of the city. It's not this type of rigorous but-for test that we have with the TIF Act. These are the only two statutory incentive tools that really require any sort of but-for or necessity test. All of the other tools that you commonly see, community improvement districts, Chapter 100 plans, Chapter 353, like the project across the street, the downtown Market Plaza project, those statutory tools do not require any sort of but-for test. Now, we've talked on many occasions under the city's economic development incentive policy how you can, as a matter of policy, essentially impose the same requirement when a project comes forward and requests incentives. So what does that mean in the most general sense? That means that you're probably looking for a demonstration that this incentive is necessary or the project won't happen, or to take it to the next level, this incentive is necessary to induce the developer to build a better project than they would if the incentives weren't provided. I think that's from having been in front of you on many projects, I think that's the general consensus of the type of analysis you apply under the city's economic development policy. But I wanted to point out that if there are questions about the necessity and the level of incentive, that's the statutory requirement. You have to find that the incentive is necessary. And then the last comment I'll make on this is for cases, for projects that have requested TIF assistance, we have required a very rigorous review of the rate of return analysis for the project. And that's because you have to make that hard but-for test under the TIF Act. So most recently for the Discovery Park project, for going back in time, the Streets of West Pryor TIF project, and then going even farther back for Summit Fair and Summit Woods, we engaged our financial advisor pursuant to a specific contract to perform an independent analysis for the city to analyze whether the incentive is necessary and if the level of incentive requested using TIF is appropriate and necessary to induce the developer to do the project. For all other types of projects, we have not used our financial advisor to do that sort of rigorous analysis. And for these other types of projects, that's a kind of analysis I probably could do, but we haven't imposed that sort of rigorous analysis on these other tools. I know that may be a point of discussion when it comes to using the LCRA tool, but we haven't done that in the past, and I wanted to make sure you have a solid foundation of what that necessity finding is as you move forward and evaluate this project. With that, that concludes my discussion and my initial presentation.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for staff or applicant? Councilmember Hodges.
Thank you. So I think where I'm kind of stuck at, and I'm struggling a little bit, because I really like the project, and I love where you guys are coming from. You're local, and you're all kind of coming together. But where I'm struggling with from the last time that we talked about this, I think it was maybe October, when you presented the numbers, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the first time you came to us, it was 25.5%, and then a lot of the comments that were made were sharpen the pencil or really work on the numbers because we didn't like quite how high it was. So I'm a little bit disappointed to see that they weren't worked too much more. So just to go from 25.5 to 24.4. So I'm a little bummed out about that because I'm struggling with that high of an ask. It just kind of makes me think, I know when you bring out comparisons when we're talking about incentives, that's if this goes through with this number, we're gonna have this as a comparison when somebody else comes to council, and then that's just gonna raise the bar for future projects. And really, I feel like we'd like to see those go down rather than climbing up. So that's kind of where my struggle is, but I don't know, I mean, are these numbers justified? I mean, does this make sense, is kind of my question.
I think I would probably turn to the developer to have them address that question for you. And that's a bit of why I talked about the necessity finding. There's not a hard statutory requirement for them to demonstrate that the rate of return is X without and Y with the incentive, anything like that. The developer's initial request, and so this wasn't even presented to you at the conceptual, they started higher than this. They were requesting 100%. Our initial response was, we don't think that's gonna fly with the city council, so they came down to 75%. I appreciate the issue you're raising. So I'll end with two thoughts, and then maybe the developer can address this. One is, ultimately, it's the developer's job to justify the level of incentive that they're requesting. And if you think that that incentive request is too high and it could be lower, I would ask them to talk with you about their rate of return without the incentive and with the incentive and why they think this level is necessary. And the second is, if the city council deems it appropriate to approve an incentive at less than 75%, you certainly have that option.
Okay, and then before you go away, can I just ask you one more thing? If this gets approved at this level, is there a way to put, I don't know if I'm using the correct term, but like a clawback saying that if they're requesting it for 25 years, that they must retain that ownership for those 25 years, so that way we're approving it for them and not somebody coming swooping in and profiting off of our incentives?
Yes, so there's two things that we could do to address this issue. I don't think we have for any of our LCRA projects, but we have used these tools in the context of TIF, which I think kind of matches up with the harder but-for test. So these, what I'm about to say sort of aligns better with TIF, and that's why we've used it with TIF as opposed to the other tools. One is, we could include in the contract a restriction on the developer's sale of the property during the abatement period. And if they want to sell it during the abatement period, there's a variety of options there. The abatement level reduces or the abatement turns off, but I can write that into our contracts, and we certainly have on other contracts. The question is the developer willing to accept that? Maybe they could answer that tonight. And then the second is, we could include a clause. It's not quite a clawback, but I think it gets at the same issue, which is a rate of return analysis that the developer has to perform on an annual basis to ensure that they're not receiving what we might call an unfair, a disproportionate rate of return from the incentive. And if the incentive results in a rate of return that's higher than whatever benchmark we set, then the abatement reduces to achieve that benchmark rate of return. It's a little more complicated, but it's certainly something that I can write and we've used in the past.
Thank you.
Good evening, Pam Hatcher with Integrity Group Real Estate. And I started this project almost 2 years ago now. I'll address your first question, or the most recent question regarding the clawback. I will not agree to a clawback. I'm the majority stakeholder in this project, and the reason is because it's a 25-year tax abatement. I am 55. That would put me at 80. I can't guarantee what type of financial situation I would be in. I mean, in the last 2 weeks, I have had personal extended family situation that I have had to extend a great deal of money on. I can't project in 5 years if I had another stroke and maybe what my family would need to do. So I would never agree to a clawback, because the only way that this project's going to go forward is with the tax abatement. So me putting up almost $1.8 million in cash out of my own pocket, and then something happening to me in 5 years, and my husband or my family needing to do something with the majority, as being majority stakeholder, I can't put those type of handcuffs on the trust. Regarding the abatement amount, as David said, we did start out at 100%. We dropped it to 75, and we're at 24.4. Regarding sharpening the pencil, the number came in as what it was the first time. Ryan Neighbors is part of the team, Neighbors Construction. They build all over the metro area. They build for North Point. They're very good at hitting their number. We worked on it, we tweaked it. I'm not going to build an inferior project. I will not do it. And the range is, I believe, 5 to 25. If you want it to be lower than 25, then the range should be 5 to 15 or whatever it needs to be. But we're within the range, and that's what we need because we aren't a big corporation from New York or California. We're just the local people here coughing up our own money.
Thank you so much for explaining.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All right, Councilmember, are you good right now? Yes. Okay. Councilmember Shields.
Thank you, Mayor. So I had a couple of questions. One is that I think on one of your slides, developer, you talked about some infrastructure improvements or supporting local infrastructure is one of the kind of target goals that you're hitting. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know you've mentioned stormwaters or anything else in particular that this project will bring to that area?
Yeah, it is mainly the stormwater retention. I'm not an expert on engineering stormwater retention underneath our parking lot, but I believe many of you are familiar with the flooding problems that occur coming down 2nd Street to underneath the railroad bridge and then even down into here with the rain and the stormwater issues. There is also a stormwater issue, the way the topology lays on Market Street heading north on the back side there. Those homes are continually getting excess stormwater. So based upon what Jennifer indicated, based upon those percentages that she quoted, the stormwater retention that we are putting underneath this parking lot on this property is going to hold that longer than what the city's current sewers and stormwater is currently doing, and it will hold it to release it.
So during most storm events that we would have down here, you would actually be seeing less water running off of the property. Obviously, it releases it slowly, right? So it's gonna go out eventually, but it'll reduce the flooding in the surrounding area.
So it's about the peak flow. I don't know, I have this lovely chart from the engineers, so I can show you, but yeah, it just mentions existing, and then proposed and the decrease in the amount. So it's gonna, all the stormwater comes in, it goes into the underground retention, and then it slows down the flow because it comes back up through all the process and flows slower.
Very similar to on any other project that a retention pond is required, right? Holds it and then it's slowly going out. This is the same thing, but it's much more costly because we're putting a parking lot on top of it.
And then I guess this is probably to staff. I'm not sure who the appropriate person would be. Would our staff agree with this analysis by their engineers that this would reduce to some extent the flooding in the surrounding areas? Obviously not solve the whole problem, but be maybe a drop in the bucket's the wrong analogy, but.
Excuse me, Ryan Elam, Assistant City Manager. Yeah, so what they're saying is accurate when it comes to the peak rate of flow coming off of the site during a rain event will be reduced due to the addition of the detention basin. I can't speak to the duration of that or anything like that, but the peak flow will be reduced from the existing condition with the addition of the detention basin.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Mr. Elam. And then the other question that I wanted to ask, and this is probably to the developer, is obviously our legal definition of blight and sort of the common definition of blight aren't always the same thing. So I don't need you to give me a full legal definition of why the property is blighted, and I trust our city attorneys that we meet that requirement. But can you talk a little bit about the more conventional blight that we're seeing there? You said these structures are uninhabitable. What's currently on the site, and what are the hazards there?
Let me start with the first property at 102. When I listed that property in 2020, at the end of 2020, somewhere in there, don't quote me the exact date, the little blue house, which if we could pull back up, okay, thank you, was a one-bedroom house. Oh, wait. Okay. I'll just use this one right here. It's right here. There we go. If you ignore this back piece that was added on, it literally was maybe 300 square feet. And it literally was a little one-bedroom, living room, kitchen type home. They enclosed a back porch, which is literally falling off. I would never let anyone step back there. And you can see the front, rooftop covered porch is about to fall off. You can't even open this front door because that roof here is come down that you can't even open the door. The foundation crawl space is all caved in. I joke about if a really good wind came, this would be gone. There's nothing in there, not to mention the mold that's in there. The next one, then that's 102, 104, and 106 are the two vacant lots. And then 108 is this one. Do you see all this vegetation? It's all grown into the house, literally. These vines go all the way across the ceiling inside. The AC doesn't work and the furnace doesn't work. And the plumbing, I'm not sure where it's going, but it's not going through the city sewers, is the most politest way I can say it. I'm not sure where it's going. Okay? And then, past it. This is the only one, this is the best one of all of them. And it's not good. Once again, there's mold, there's broken windows, the roof, it could not, I've flipped houses, and I would not even attempt to flip this house.
Thank you. That's very helpful in understanding. I think when we talk about LCRA, and I guess we'll have more full discussion afterwards, but I think it's valuable to see why it's so important to actually clear and redevelop this site, that it really is hazardous to the area right now. So I think those are all of my questions, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember DeMoro.
Thank you, Mayor. Several of my questions have been asked, but I do have a couple more, and I'm concerned with, or I have a question about. There was a slide that showed, you had a slide that showed the design and land costs. Are the land costs included in your project? Because I was under the impression that you were the owner of these properties. In other words, and you bought them sometime back a couple of years ago?
Yes.
So are the land costs associated with this project?
Yes, we have them accounted for in the 1.2 million.
Okay, so you've owned the land for 2 years, and yet you're trying to recoup the land cost, is that correct? I mean, I just want to understand what I'm looking at here.
It's just part of the budget.
Just part of the budget, okay, all right. And then when the houses were purchased, was anybody living in them in this condition?
One gentleman was living in the plant-infested one, is what I call it. I'm not sure exactly how he was living in that one, but otherwise he was homeless. So the owners had been allowing him to live there. Okay? In 108. And then 110, we bought that one separately. That was owned by a different party. And they were elderly and were not able to keep up with the property. All 5 of these properties were owned by elderly people and were not at all in a position to take care of the properties. And that at the time, before we closed on it, the mother and 2 children also moved out because they hadn't been paying rent in like 6 or 9 months. So again, I think that the owners were just letting them live there because they were grandparents and they felt bad for the kids. I wanted them to go to school.
Yeah, and if they got rent, they got rent.
And then I wanted to ask you, Mr. Bushak, you talked about the notches that in 2012, what the city council included and excluded. How do we get beyond the notches not included in the blight recommendation by the city council in 2012? Is there anything that would, that we have to do to include those notches, or as a result of the blight?
Well, if you approve this redevelopment plan, the ordinance includes a blight finding for these 5 parcels. So if you approve the ordinance, those 5 parcels will essentially be added to this area. It will create maybe an odd donut hole here, but you have to make a blight finding of these 5 properties to approve this redevelopment plan that's proposed to you. As to the remainder of the properties, there's nothing that compels you or requires you to make a blight finding for those properties. If a project, I'll just pick one, if a project comes forward down here, for example, and they're requesting to use LCRA, you would need to make a blight finding for those properties. But I don't think there's anything that's planned to sort of, close off the boundaries and change anything else at this time.
Okay, all right. And then one more question for the applicant. You did mention, you gave, the circumstances of a clawback, why you're against a clawback or you don't want to establish a clawback. But you did say that you would understand if there was a reduction in the incentive to take care of anything future. I mean, that would free you up in 10 or 15, 20 years. And you're okay with that?
I don't believe I said that, but what is it that you're asking me to
Well,
agree to?
You said, no, I'm not asking you to
Oh.
agree to anything. When you said no clawback, you mentioned 10, 15 years if we decided to reduce the incentive term.
Can I ask you a question? Okay, so help me understand, what is the benefit of us specifically owning it for the 25 years? Do you know what I mean?
Because the incentives would go with a new owner.
Right.
Yeah, that's.
I think what she's asking is whether it's us 3 or ABC or XYZ.
Right.
The building is being built for the city and all the benefits are coming. So whether it's Pam, Jen, and Ryan, or it's ABC or XYZ for that 25 years, we're trying to figure out from a city perspective, what does that matter? My intention, as I told you, Ellis Glen is named after my grandfather. So, I'm not standing up here planning on tomorrow selling it, right? But I can't, at age 55, adding 25 years, can't commit to that. So I'm just trying to understand from the council's perspective, what is the difference between these 3 people versus ABC or XYZ? What's the difference?
It's the incentives. The incentives would go with the property.
Right, but it proves in the project to get it built for that 25 years. So when somebody else, if we had to sell it because I was in a nursing home and my husband needed the money to pay for it, and we sold it to ABC, what does it matter that ABC still gets it? I'm just trying to figure that out.
You're the initial investor. I think you stated the amount of money that you had to invest out of your own pocket.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you're the one that's taking the risk and to transfer that incentive to somebody else that didn't take a risk.
Okay.
For the remainder of the 25 years. Yeah.
Mr. Bushak, please.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
At the risk of having a debate here at the podium with the applicant, I'll go ahead and articulate answers to her question for you so we can all understand this. We have these sort of restrictions in certain other contracts, and it's usually in our TIF contracts, and I think it probably goes back to the original sort of but-for test maybe. We require a more rigorous analysis of the need for the incentive in the case of tax increment financing, and we have a very rigorous analysis of the rate of return analysis as a justification for that but-for test. And over time, what sort of spun out from that are various contract restrictions that address exactly the issue you're asking about. It's very common for us to have a restriction in our TIF contracts that say, I'm going to summarize or simplify, the developer cannot sell any of the property in the TIF area without the city's prior approval. And they have to come forward and demonstrate, there's various standards that are set forth in the contract. They have to demonstrate that the developer has the financial wherewithal to continue and complete the project if it's not completed, that they can continue to maintain the property and follow through with the implementation of the blight clearance functions of the TIF plan. They have to demonstrate that they have sufficient financial capability. And ultimately, and we've seen it in some cases, those requests come forward to the city council for approval. An example would be in the case of the Summit Fair TIF plan, there have been numerous requests to transfer that property to other parties. There was a request to transfer the balance of that shopping center to another investor property from a foreign country. The city council approved that. There have been requests to transfer specific lots in the Summit Fair TIF area to specific users. That comes to the city council and you get to approve that. The policy reasons behind that, in very simple terms, we want to make sure that it's a good quality company that's stepping into an incentivized area. We want to make sure that this is a company that if they were standing here at the podium tonight talking to you, that's a company that you would want to approve that incentive for. Because incentives are extra, just as the word says, it's an extra incentive to develop in our city, and it's using tax revenues, it's diverting tax revenues that would otherwise flow to the taxing districts, and that's the reason that we've required that in some cases. So, simple summary is we want to make sure that it's a good, solid company that the city is essentially partnering with by providing the incentive. I think that's probably the best reason. Secondary reason would be, and it sort of speaks to the other questions that have been asked, is it an unfair rate of return that this developer is receiving as a result of the incentive? Is it a substantial windfall for them to redevelop this property, receive the incentive, and then sell it for something that's an unfair sales price as compared to what they could sell it for without the incentive? That would be a second reason. And then the third, and this is what I've picked up from discussion on this issue, is sort of the perception of all of these things packaged together. That it sort of seems unfair for one company to receive an incentive and then very soon after the project is developed, transfer it to somebody else for a substantial windfall without the city council having some say in the matter because you've provided the incentives. Those are the reasons that I think are the answer to your question, to her question in response to your question.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, let's go to Councilmember Pryor. And with regard to clawbacks, everything's negotiable. That's for sure. But I will say that since I've been here, I've worked really hard with staff to try to eliminate clawbacks because they're not easy to put a dollar amount on. They're not tangible. You can't really say what the value is, and they end up becoming, no offense, but a point of lawsuits later on, and it's just easier to get all the terms set up front and then not have to try to open that box later on. So whatever we agree to, we need to be comfortable with, and I say not rely on a clawback, but we could debate clawbacks all night long. So let's keep going. Councilmember Pryor.
Thank you, Mayor. When you bought these houses and the lots, what was your intention? Has this always been your intention, or did you try to? I'll let you answer.
I listed these properties for the seller, the 4 of them initially, and they had been on the market for 18 months. Another real estate agent / developer actually had a contract on them for a set price. After, I believe, 4 months, 2 days before closing, he called me and said, hey, I need a 6-month extension. I said, okay. I went to the sellers. As I mentioned earlier, they are a much older couple, and they just said no. Okay. I said, want to counter something? They said, nope. He didn't keep his word? Nope. Thank you. And hung up. Okay. So I called back the buyer and said, they're not going to extend, contract's over. He said, well, I want my earnest money back. I said, I didn't say you couldn't have it, just send me a cancellation. They just, that's, they're old school and you didn't keep your word. So I called, I actually called CW Architects and said, hey guys, I know you're interested in possibly, building the downtown Lee Summit. Lots are back up for sale. And as I'm talking through this, I said, why am I telling you guys this? I should just buy the lots myself. Thanks anyway, guys, bye. I hung up, went home, told my husband I want to buy these lots. As a licensed broker, I cannot negotiate the price. I have to pay the listed price, otherwise it's an ethics violation. The difference was that on that first offer, the offer included a carryback by the sellers of $250,000. I called them up and said, I'd like the exact same deal. I'll pay you the list price, but I'll pay you cash and we'll close in 2 weeks. They said, fine. The intent was always to build a multi-use building. I ended up bringing in Jennifer and Ryan because I had previously purchased one of Jennifer's commercial buildings and we remained friends. And then Ryan was her next door neighbor, and of course I knew Neighbors Construction because my son works at North Point Development, and Neighbors Construction does their apartment buildings.
And interestingly, the 102 through 108 lots were the original ones she purchased, so there was that, the very first one,
110.
yeah, that's right, it would have been our building and then this one tiny little lot with the
Broken window.
yes, and then the rest of this, and so when we had a very preliminary conversation with the city, and they basically said, this would look a whole lot nicer if you had that one too.
As
So-
well as the architects, because
Yeah.
we needed a little bit more area for the drainage and that. So we contacted the sellers, made them an offer, and bought it.
I had several questions. Most of my questions have been answered. Do you know how many apartments have been rented out already of?
Elevate 114.
Ryan Elam again, Assistant City Manager. So the information that I have, based off of a very good source, Ryan Adams, the project manager over there that runs that, told me, or told individual in this room that it was 94% right now is what their occupancy rate is.
Are they opening up more? Are they fully open?
Yeah, they've got full CO and, they're operating.
Okay, thank you. And then have you already had interest, or have you already started potentially leasing out?
Yeah, there's a good chance I already have all the commercial filled. I do not have signed leases, but I certainly have verbal commitments.
Are they new businesses, or are they?
Two of them
businesses
are.
That are not currently in Lee Summit?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, can I add one thing? I made a presentation to Lee Summit North Marketing Group, seniors last week, and they are actually taking our project and coming up with a plan on how to market it. And I offered them a 4x8 sign on the site if it all got approved, and they could each put up their own marketing plan with recognition with their name and the school and that, so that when people went walking by, it would maybe generate more interest in the commercial space. However, I possibly just leased out the last space yesterday. So, but thought that would be great for the students.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mayor Pro Tem Lopez.
Thank you, Mayor. So kind of like what's been said already, and I said this before the last time you all came in with your conceptual, I commend you and your team and a group of investors for wanting to come into the downtown area and continue to invest and grow our downtown core. So that goes without saying. So I think we all appreciate you all being here. But we do have a responsibility up here on the dais because, I know the question's been brought up, what does it matter about the 25-year ownership versus the term of the abatement? Because we're investors with you. And we are trying to protect future tax revenue for the people we represent. And so I think that's why we're asking that. So it's not personal. But with that being said, just the economics of this whole transaction or your project, just a couple questions I have. So you said 116 jobs. I assume most of that's construction, during the construction phase.
Well,
What's the net jobs of the actual building when it's up and going?
direct jobs, how
That
many?
actually-
Like with the office spaces and,
That was
Yeah.
with the people moving in, remember?
So,
That was off the other presentation.
yes, the new and the direct and indirect jobs, that came off of a study. I don't have the quote anymore. It's on the original presentation, but a study that was done, and it's the, gosh, I can't remember the story, but it's an actual economic institute. So they looked at, we projected that we'd have probably 15 like actual jobs per those units, so 45 jobs. And then they have this whole table about, if you add 45 professional / office level jobs, it results in, this many more city people, this many more copy, paper, marketing places. So it's got this whole calculator of, if you add this many jobs, it results in all of these other indirect jobs, because that person needs an accountant, that person needs an attorney, that person needs to get their documents printed somewhere. So that's where the 116 came from. And then the sales tax from new residents, interestingly, also, I apologize, the source is in the original presentation, but the Downtown Lease Summit, what is that person's name who gave us this? You know what I mean? The economics for Downtown Lease Summit.
Donnie Rogers?
Donnie.
Okay,
Yep.
he pointed us in the direction of this other study, and it was another graph. And so it showed in a similar downtown area, if you bring in one residence with, I think it was like, there was like $1,000 to $1,400 in rent, $1,400 to $1,800, et cetera. But then that showed like, they have to buy groceries, they have to buy, clothes and all this stuff. And so that's where that $743,000 number came from.
okay.
So
yeah.
I can show those to you.
Thank you
but-
for explaining that.
Yeah.
That's kind of part of what I was trying to get at, so I appreciate that. And then what, if you can just share, because that does impact your pro forma and your numbers, what lease rates are you charging for the office spaces, retail?
for the office?
Commercial,
$20 a square foot, triple net.
okay.
And all three that have given verbals are fine with that.
Okay,
I mean, we really haven't had any brand new commercial space built in, I don't know how long, down here.
okay.
And the residential would be similar to the Elevate 114.
And that was my next
Yeah.
question, so thank you.
Yeah.
The other couple other questions. I know you talked about the water retention, you all are doing to prevent water flooding in the downtown area. What other public improvements are we talking about? Are there any others benefit to the public? Additional sidewalks or?
I was gonna say sidewalks and the curbing in that. If you've been up in that area at all, there are a couple of like little curb driveways. I think when the city redid the streets however many years ago, because there are 2 lots there, they did these little cut-ins, and people during downtown days or any events, people attempt to park up on those little driveways that aren't really driveways. And it really becomes quite a mess during any of the Oktoberfest or downtown days, because everybody's looking for free parking, right? And they go over there, and so that will, part of the, with it being a blighted area, no one's there to monitor it, right? And during Oktoberfest, I know there was quite a scuffle up there because somebody had pulled up in there and then parked cars and somebody couldn't get out, and, maybe somebody might have been at the Oktoberfest beer tent a little too long and, didn't take kindly to it. So all the curbs will be cleared up. And then, of course, we're also adding additional patio space to allow the outside area, which I think everybody in downtown is enjoying.
Okay. Okay, and then back to the, it's more of a comment, the questions that were asked about, being at that higher end of the spectrum on similar type projects that we've approved here in recent years. Part of the reason why we as a collective body have been very consistent is that we just want to be that. We want to be consistent. And we don't want to deviate too far from, these numbers where we're at, what we're committing the city to support developers with. And, with that being said, this is at the higher end, and I understand it's probably a little bit more expensive to work with the redevelopment projects such as this one versus a greenfield ground-up construction, so I get that.
That's exactly what I was going to bring up. I understand consistency, but going to an open field where the horses used to run compared to working in downtown Lee Summit and taking down old houses and doing the demo on it and, having to remove the utilities in 5 different lots and starting, you've already incurred all the costs that no one else had to incur on an open field one. And it actually costs more to build a smaller unit than it does to build a larger one. So I understand what you're saying about that, but it is going to be more costly to build in downtown than it is to build a large shopping center out on the outskirts.
Okay, all right, thank you for those responses. Mayor, that's all I have for now.
Thank you. Councilmember Felker.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, applicant. Appreciate your comments. I think most of my questions, I may come back to you. I know I'm going to start with Mr. Bushek, if you could answer a few questions I have. First was just refreshing my memory on when we rezoned that area. I know you said last year, and was it in what context? I don't recall.
October 4th last year.
And was that in relation to this project?
Yes.
That we did that? Okay.
Yeah, that you approved the rezoning to the Central Business District and the PDP for this project.
And it was just that area, we weren't rezoning anything else in
Correct.
connection with it? Okay. And then, I know you did this, so forgive me, and I hope everyone else forgives me for asking. You identified our 3 primary findings that we have to make. Could you just quickly run through those again?
Sure. Blight finding,
Yep.
and I already had my one comment, which is I don't think there's a problem with the blight finding. Conformance with the comprehensive plan, which I think is sort of part and parcel of your zoning decision you've already made. And then the third is necessity. You have to find that the redevelopment area is necessary and in the interest of the public health, safety, morals, and welfare of the residents of the city.
As you said, and that, you contrasted that to other but-for tests and so forth. In this case, it really is, again, if we simply find it necessary.
Right.
Again, it's.
Right, and so, there's one, we've never really had this discussion before in the context of LCRA, but one could argue that the necessity of redeveloping this area is to cure the blight, as opposed to the financial analysis that we typically impose on the but-for test through TIF. So for example, and I'll walk through this quickly again, with the TIF Act, that's the most rigorous finding. You have to find that without the use of this incentive, this project would not happen, which necessarily implicates digging into the numbers to determine that if we don't use this TIF and we don't provide this incentive to this developer, from a financial standpoint, this project will not happen. That requirement is not imposed by the LCRA Act or any other of the statutory tools that we use. And as I said, and I just read it again, it's a pretty soft necessity finding. It just says that redevelopment of the redevelopment area is necessary. And an argument I think is probably a valid argument if we were ever challenged is, you could find that it's necessary to redevelop this property to clear the blight, as opposed to digging into the numbers and finding that it's also necessary from a financial standpoint to induce the project. But ultimately, that's up to you, and I would defend whatever decision you make.
Thank you. In the past, and I believe even in the old packet in October, well, I haven't pulled it up. We often compare current, you have a sheet of paper that compares all our projects. Do you have that? You haven't shown it to us today.
I do. I'd have to go get my computer.
Mind?
Yeah. And there's a wire here somewhere that I need to plug in. I may ask Ryan to help me out finding that. Here. Okay. So this is residential. I don't have a comparable chart for office, although this has an office component. But this is the residential chart. And to walk through it quickly and kind of summarize as we have in the past, you've got the 4 different types of land uses: the apartments, townhomes, the mixed use, which is the Griffin Riley project, which you have the development agreement on the agenda later tonight, and then senior care. And then you have the different categories of legal authority, the type of incentive, and the characteristics. And I suppose as a point of comparison, if you look at the second column in legal authority, LCRA, the city council has approved LCRA plans on 4 previous occasions. The first one is the Cityscape Downtown project, and that was a combination tax increment financing and LCRA. The LCRA tool in that case was solely for the sales tax exemption on construction materials. Then the next one down, I've actually got it penciled in because I created this chart after they made their conceptual, is the Ellis Glen project. Under townhomes, the Streets of West Pryor, Vanguard Villas, that used the LCRA tool to provide 50% tax abatement for 25 years over the undermined area, which is the western part of the Streets of West Pryor project. And then the second to the last at the bottom, the Princeton project, that is the senior care facility that use LCRA. Each one of these projects has its own story. The Princeton project was essentially to reimburse the developer for the extraordinary sewer costs that were associated with developing in that area. So we've used the LCRA incentive tool for residential in 3 previous occasions, and as you see, I've got the Ellis Glen penciled in because they had already made their conceptual at the time I redrafted this chart.
Okay, so my next question, thank you for showing this. I appreciate this. We've talked about the 5 to 25, and I don't know that we have a comprehensive comparison chart there. I think every time we do this, we look at that, and it's part of one of the sheets you've already shown us, where the percentage of the total project cost that is absorbed by the incentive. But part of me wants to look at something like this that incorporates that.
Well, so that's a good point. Next month, we are taking the discussion about changes to the incentive policy to the Community and Economic Development Committee. And one of the things that I have on my list of things to do is to update this chart, update the industrial chart. I have already produced a TIF chart, and then one of the things that I would like to do is exactly what you just mentioned, which is take these various charts by type of land use, figure out a way to unify them, summarize them, and because this range of incentives, the 5 to 25% incentive, that's the only sort of apples to apples comparison we have across all these different incentive types. I would like to produce a chart that starts to analyze the information exactly like you're suggesting.
That seems, and that's where I'm kind of wrestling a little bit right now. And I realize I appreciate the applicant saying, if we wanted to have a different range, we should communicate that, and I think at least my own self, wrestling with that as we consider the impact of incentives. Okay. But again, and do you have any recollection of what projects might have been on that upper end that your memory help?
Yeah, generally the larger projects, so I know Discovery Park was at the higher end, Streets of West Pryor was at the higher end. I would have to check the data to go beyond that. I think I have a few other data points in mind, but I might misstate them.
Okay, and I'm asking you this now. I didn't ask you earlier, so I appreciate the effort you make. Do we typically, when it comes to different incentives, incorporate the acquisition costs?
Yes, that's very common. I would say it's standard to include the acquisition costs, and there's a very good reason for that. One is it's part of the total investment incurred by the developer. And secondly, we've never really talked about this point either, but the land cost and the land value impacts all the numbers that we analyze to determine all of the different data points we've been discussing. So the value of the cost of the land plays a part of the value of the land, which the county includes when they assess the value of the property and the improvements. So that's a component of the valuation of the property, which translates into property taxes, which translates into the benefit to the developer from the real property tax abatement and the pilots that flow to the city. And it's the one thing that provides an apples-to-apples comparison across all of these projects. We have uniformly included, and we've told the developer to do this in the cases that they haven't, include the land costs in your budget so we can analyze all these data points on a uniform basis.
Typically, our applicants also, their purchase and the application for the incentive are within a relatively short time frame. Meaning, I'm looking here, and maybe John Knox Village being an exception, these applicants have all been buyers, come to the table with their application. They haven't owned the property for 20 or 30
That's
years.
usually the case.
So in this case, we have a 2 to 3 year time frame between acquisition and the present.
Yes, that's usually the case. Most of the time, and it's not always the case, the developer has an option to purchase the property, and they go through the governmental approvals period, seeking your zoning approval and any incentive approvals before they decide to purchase the property. That's most common.
Okay, a couple more questions. What protections are actually in the current agreement? We've talked a lot about clawbacks and what happens if they were to sell it in a certain time frame, but what protections are in there now that can give the council comfort that the arrangement is there to benefit us?
There's a document that's in the meeting packet that is a pretty exhaustive bullet point list of all those protections. The bullet list itself is 3.5 pages, and the protections fall in the categories of, I'll just summarize the areas of focus, not every one of these even. Title of the property in compliance with all other laws, to make sure that the city holds valid title to the property for the duration of the project. So we do that sort of due diligence up front, just as the developer does before they purchase the property. Safeguards regarding construction of the project, and the simple way to summarize it is the developer constructs the project just like they would if it was not incentivized. The fact that the city is the owner of the property to implement the incentive does not impact at all the construction. The city has no construction responsibilities. We have environmental protections, compliance with environmental laws, and indemnification for failure to do so. We have the various rent provisions which ensure that rent is paid, which is essentially the pilots, the 25% pilots. Developer has the responsibility for maintenance and repairs, so the city does not have to step in to maintain or repair the project. Company has to pay all of the other taxes and assessments that are associated with the project, including the city's excise tax and any other taxes that may be due on the property. Developer has to keep the property insured. They have to maintain title insurance. They have to carry property insurance, liability insurance, and there's an indemnification running to the city. The company cannot allow liens to be incurred on the property, and they must discharge any liens that may attempt to be filed, which they can't be because the city owns the property and you can't foreclose on city property, but they're still responsible for discharging the liens. They're responsible for repairing any damage or destruction, and they have to make the decision whether to rebuild in the event that the project is damaged or destroyed for any reasons. There's a number of special covenants that protect the city. We're making no warranty as to the suitability of the property. That's their responsibility, just as it normally would be if it was a private project. They bear the risk for loss of buildings, improvements, furniture, fixtures, et cetera. And that list is pretty extensive also. They're given the right to grant easements and do the things that are necessary to make the project function as it normally would as a private project. And the city's protected in the event that they grant any of those easements or other rights to other parties to make the project function. So in essence, we own bare title. They're responsible for the project just as if it was a private project. And we have all these protections built into the lease.
So, so those in my mind could be summarized into like protection against casualty, right? Something happening that is undesirable and that results in a cost.
Yes.
And since we're owners, bare title, as you say, this just means that all responsibility lies with them.
Correct.
So let me just, and I know we've had these conversations before, but in the event, and we've talked about clawbacks today a little bit, what other mechanisms could be in place that protect the interest of the city? That may not be that aren't in the contract now. And so that's kind of a broad question. I know there's probably a lot of them, but if you could highlight a few that are worth.
Well, based on the areas of concern that I've heard the council discuss tonight, the one that started with the question of would the applicant be willing to live with a no sale restriction? She answered that question. There's other variations of that. One is allowing the city pre-approval rights for the transfer of property, just as we do with certain other types of incentives. That's a fairly standard provision, and I would argue that the standards we include are fairly objective. They're rigorous enough for us to be satisfied that the buyer is a good buyer and is somebody that, like I said, the best point of comparison is if the proposed buyer were standing here tonight making this presentation to you, would you think that's a good company that you would like to give an incentive to? That's sort of the analysis. Another option would be a restriction on the sale of property for a certain number of years. Doesn't have to be 25, could be a much shorter period. There's other variations like this that, you know, a combination of these different types of tools that we could use. I don't want to, you know, try to negotiate the agreement here from the podium, but these are the sort of tools that we have available.
Okay. Sense of my notes. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bush. I appreciate that. I don't actually think I have any questions for the applicant, but again, thank you for being here and presenting today. Appreciate being able to look at this. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Shields.
Mayor, I just had a couple of additional questions for the applicant after hearing all of my colleagues' questions that kind of occurred to me here. So, as was mentioned before, usually when something like this comes to us, the person just has an option to purchase the property and they don't already own it. So if you weren't to receive these incentives, what would happen? Would you try to sell off the lots? Would you build single-family homes? Would you just sit on them and let your kids inherit them? What's your thoughts at this point?
Honestly, I'll leave them sit right where they're sitting
Okay,
and let the blight sit there.
I guess that's your right. And then my other question is, as far as we talked about purchase restrictions or sale restrictions, would you be open to some kind of a less restrictive terms there, something like, you know, a 5-year purchase restriction so we could see the project was built, or having a reasonable approval of the purchaser by the city? What, is there any wiggle room there?
Not that we're negotiating at the podium, David, but yes, I think I would be open to city approval.
Okay. Those are all my questions. Thank you, and thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember
Just so
Pryor.
that you all know, I have no interest in having somebody who has no experience whatsoever, you know, coming in and managing and taking over this property. Don't forget, my grandfather's name's on that building. Okay?
It's a little, I mean, I guess I would ask you guys, do you see yourself sitting in this seat in 25 years? It's hard to commit to 25 years. It's a really long time. So, I mean, that's where some of our reservation comes from. Like, you know, you're 55, I'm 48. Will you be here in 25 years? I don't know.
And so we just want to be able to have we don't want to be tied up. I mean, like I said, we got a lot of cash, our own personal cash that the banks are not giving to us. That, I mean, you
So
start
maybe this
counting
is
out
our
those.
downside of being individuals versus a big company. The big company, you know, they can transfer ownership a lot easier than 3 individuals from lease some I can't. I don't know. It's just that's where the 25-year heartburn is for us, is for 3 individuals, it's a really long time.
And for me, 1.8 million of my own cash is a lot of money.
So, well, if that helps.
Councilmember Pryor has a couple questions.
Thank you, Mayor. So you wouldn't, if this does not get approved, you're just gonna leave the houses as they are for an undetermined amount of time?
I mean,
We'll mow the grass.
we'll look for other opportunities, but at this point, we don't have a vision for how to recoup money financially doing a project that's not this one.
I had them on the market for almost 2 years, and no one made an offer, except for one person.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll just ask a couple questions. Mr. Bushek. So I've heard all kinds of different, thanks for the tutorial on LCRA tonight. That's one thing. The consistency, remarks on consistency, so we're within the range, 5 to 25%. I know that, I remember those charts, I've seen them so many times, that we often are in that 15 to 25 range. We've gone above that before. But is there just making sure, because once we get out of the public hearing, then if I make statements, I want to make sure they're accurate. So like, there's no consideration for the size of the project. In other words, we use percentages because it's more consistent than, when you're talking about, 80 million, $50 million projects versus an 8 million. So am I fair to say that's why we use the percentages?
Yes, that percentage, the benefit to the developer from the incentive package as a percentage of the total project cost is, I can't say it's the only, but it is certainly one thing that's apples to apples across all projects and all incentive tools that we've provided. And the other thing that I'll say, and I could back this up with the data, and I probably will later when I do the chart that Councilmember Felker alluded to earlier, the projects that are at the lower end of that range, probably the 5 to 15%, are those apartment projects, most of them I think, are the apartment projects that have received Chapter 100. The sales and use tax exemption for a project is usually in the range of 3 to 5% of total project costs. It's relatively nominal compared to the total project costs because all they're saving is the sales tax that they would pay on the construction materials. And construction materials is only a part of the construction cost. Labor is usually more. Then there's land costs, site costs, et cetera. So that's a relatively small benefit. And then the second component of those Chapter 100 projects is the fixed pilot. And you've heard this debate before. We've actually had this debate with certain projects where I'm in a position of having to explain to you what I think the tax abatement benefit is to the company based on the information that we receive from the county and the analysis that we have to apply. And then you've heard from the developer say that's not accurate because if this was on the market, we'd appeal our taxes, and so they're not really as high as the county's telling you they would be, and so the range is lower. We have that debate. Point being, that pushes the benefit of the incentive package to those projects down in the lower range. So that's the 5 to 15%. So the 15 to 25% are these type of projects and the TIF projects and the CID projects that you've seen before.
Right. The chart you showed today showed some LCRA because it was like to like as far as having some kind of residential component, but we've done quite a few LCRA before, just smaller, and either typically were strictly commercial, and but we haven't really done one in the downtown recently.
No, we haven't. So,
Did maybe the Stanley?
yeah, so the LCRA is actually a very old statutory tool. And from what I've learned, the city had an LCRA that was active decades ago. It was essentially fired up again back around the year 2010 or so. And the first incentive tool that was used by this city's LCRA was called the Certificate of Qualification. It's a very specific tool that allows the city to grant tax abatement to a project that's growing or expanding up to 100% of the increased value of the project. So the base is you start with the value of the land and improvements today, whatever that building is, And then when they improve the value, the certificate of qualification allows abatement just of that added value. The tool we're talking about tonight allows us to abate the entire value of the project if that's what you choose to do. It's a very different incentive tool. So comparing this to the previous projects where in the early years of the current iteration of the LCRA, that was just certificate of qualification, and that was a very different incentive tool for a very different type of project than this, really.
Okay. And you're comfortable, I mean, you obviously went through your numbers on your spreadsheets, but you're comfortable that they match closely enough with the developers with regard to the impact, you know, the return on investment, you know, for the city as far as sales tax dollars as well as property tax dollars?
Yes, I went through what I typically do. I run my own calculations using the most recent property tax data, my own knowledge of what the county applies, et cetera. And in this case, based on our early discussions with the developer, they were largely taking our lead on how to run those calculations because they haven't done this before. And yes, my calculations matched up with theirs, and we are in alignment.
Okay. Okay. Then I'm going to ask at this time if there are anyone here that wishes to speak in favor or in opposition to this application, please come forward. All right. Does the council have any further questions for staff or applicant? All right. Does applicant care to make any further comment? All right, thank you. Hearing no further comments or questions, I'm going to close the regular session and open the close the public hearing and open the regular session back up. And the only thing I want to say is let's just try to, we have had a tutorial tonight, but let's try to be consistent. I understand this is a smaller project, but we want to treat it equally in the same way we would a larger project. So when we compare back to other projects that we've incentivized this way. So I'll start with you, Councilmember Shields.
Thank you, Mayor. So I really appreciated presentation tonight, the information that the applicant and staff provided. There are a few points that really stuck out to me, and I'll just state up front, I would support this request. Right now, the property is blighted, like very obviously so. And there are times at this dais when I really question whether a project that we're looking at is really blighted, even if it meets that legal requirement. And I look at this and I look at what those houses are and how they're affecting the surrounding area, how they look in our downtown, how they're affecting their neighbors, and they need to get removed. From everything that we heard in the hearing tonight, they are not rehabable. And then I look at how this will impact city revenues. And since the developer took some of our feedback, took staff's feedback, and came back with this request for 75% rather than 100% abatement, we're looking at actually substantial revenue increases for the city. So right now, if it just sits there and continues to be blighted, in addition to being a negative impact on the neighborhood and the community, it's bringing in less tax revenue than it would if we approved this request and it was redeveloped. I think that's good for the city. I think it's good for the surrounding property owners. They talked about the stormwater improvements. That'll be good for the surrounding property owners, including the rest of our downtown. I like the project itself. I think it fits the area. I think it's a good transition from the commercial to the residential. And I appreciate the developer says that they would be open to reasonable approval of future transfers so that we can make sure that even if this developer doesn't keep the project for 25 years, that whoever would step into their shoes is someone that the city would approve of. So given all that, I think it really would be a benefit to the community and to the city. So I would support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Pryor.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with a lot of what Councilmember Shields said. I like the project. I am really struggling with the incentive request. I think that I like seeing added density downtown. I like seeing places that will support the shops that are already in downtown, and this does that. So overall, I'm leaning towards yes, although I am really struggling with the incentive request. But I do think that overall, I do like this project for the downtown area. Thank you.
Thank you. I would say, I'll just say on when I made the comment about let's being consistent, I just want to make sure that we're treating, a smaller business owner the same as we have the bigger investors that have come to our community. As much as we appreciate these bigger investors, I want to make sure that we're consistent with the message that we're sending to small business owners and such. And so if we find reasons to do something differently, we need to try to really strengthen our rationale in doing so. So, Councilmember Felker. Oh,
I
I'm
just,
sorry.
I just wanted to
Councilmember
say one
Perry.
thing. I
Yeah.
feel like, me personally, I feel like I am being consistent. I was a no for Discovery Park, and one of the big reasons was the amount of incentives. So I do feel like I have been, at least tried to be consistent.
I wasn't referring to you
No, I know, but I was
specifically.
just, yeah, thank you.
No, thank you. Councilmember Felker.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just gonna, the only piece I want to re-echo, because I think it's worth making sure we incorporate it into whatever decision, if it's in the affirmative, is that we would incorporate the pre-approval rights. I think that's a reasonable thing. I think generally speaking, when you have this kind of a incentive and it's that much of really an investment on the part of on the city and our taxpayers, I mean, that's the big piece I have, is we are investors, and to the extent that that investment is going to continue, we want to make sure that we can have, whether that's us or a whole new slew of people, and that we have the opportunity to have a say in the ongoing investment. So that's all I have.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Bushek, we have had that type of condition on quite a few contracts, haven't we?
Yes, we've used that before. It's, I think it's safe to say we've used it every time with our TIF contracts, and we have with some others, I think. But
Right.
yeah, it's fairly common with TIF. Yeah.
But it's not necessarily, I understand. So, so if you have comment on that, I'm sure that we could get, if we approve this, you could negotiate that on our behalf.
Yeah, absolutely. I will be including that in the draft that goes to the developer.
Right. Okay, thank you. Councilmember DeMoro?
I would certainly be in favor of what Councilmember Felker mentioned. Would it be customary, too, to put a stipulation on no less than 5 years, or no less than 5 years can the property be sold?
Meaning an action tonight or later at the contract stage?
Contract stage.
So I'll go ahead and tell you, I plan on including that in the contract.
Okay.
But it sounds like, based on the discussion we've had and what I thought I heard from the applicant, the 5-year restriction may be agreeable and the city approval of a transfer may be agreeable, and that's what I plan to include in the contract that we'll be negotiating.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Edson?
Yeah. I've liked this project from the beginning. The incentives, I've been listening to you all ask questions. Every time I kind of phoned in, somebody asked my question. So I was in and out.
I wonder what was going on, because your name kept coming up and then disappeared.
know.
It came up and then disappeared.
Plus, I was picking up trash. I'm tired.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Still getting over there. No, but I wonder, I mean, we are within the incentive policy. Okay. And I was like, well, maybe we need to change the incentive policy. But now I'm kind of thinking, maybe we need to adjust it a different way and go, maybe the smaller people need more help. Maybe they should be at the upper end, and the larger developers, maybe they only go up to 10 or 15% when we do this. And one of the reasons I say that is because sometimes we've approved projects with enormous amount of incentives that never materialize. So maybe that's a red flag, but that's my only thought. See, I told you, too much trash.
Thank you. Councilmember Felker?
At the risk of opening up a conversation, can I ask Mr. Bushek a question? So this concept of taxpayers in a sense being investors in the project, in the event there was a later sale, and I know Councilmember Lovell has often mentioned this, and there was and please, this is not just about your project, but others as well, where you have a certain incentive that we give, whatever it is, and then later there's a sale, and the purchase price at that point of sale is well beyond what we may have had in our initial packet that approved the initial numbers. I think the answer to this is no, but I'll ask, have we ever had anything in there where if the delta is such, fill in the blank, between initial price and sales price, that there's actually some kind of recoupment?
No, there's two provisions we've used that are in the ballpark. One is an analysis of the annual rate of return that the developer is receiving on the project and scaling the reimbursement and the incentive to stay below that rate of return. And another is measurement of the amount of total project cost compared to the incentive benefit. There's only been one case of those, but it's essentially the Streets of West Pryor ratio between total dollars invested by the company and total certified reimbursable project costs for the project. So it measures essentially how much money have they put in and how much money have we put in, and we have to match a ratio. Those are the two tools we've used in the past. We have never had a contract provision that I can think of that analyzes the developer's sale price as compared to some benchmark. We've only ever had restrictions or control measures on the sale of the property to a company along the lines of what I discussed tonight with city pre-approval rights. That's as far as we've gone.
Okay. And part of what I'm thinking through is I deal with clients who may have investors, and they do have some kind of a payout mechanism. And so here I am, we're representing taxpayers who are coming in, investing something. Obviously, the applicant is as well. So that's where my thinking is going. I don't know that it's a perfect comparison. I'm thinking from the private sector, but there's, we're definitely foregoing something. And is there some kind of return on the back end because of what we've decided to forego?
The answer is yes, there could be, and there is a tool that I have thought about and I've discussed with our city team. We have never rolled it out with the city council, and maybe that's something that we should discuss in the context of the changes that we'll be talking about to the city's economic development incentive policy. But the issue that you're thinking of is something that I have thought about quite a bit, and we've talked about as a team, but we've never, like I said, we've never rolled it out yet.
Thank you, Mr. Bushek. And I know the applicant was raising your hand. Did you want to comment?
No, that's my job.
Yeah, please. Well, that's what.
I can make the argument that she probably is going to make, which is quite simply that if we're really investors in this as a city, then why are we trying to eliminate all risk and put it all on the developer? In other words, if we're really in this, and we're gonna put some stipulation in that says they can only sell it for X amount of dollars and not this much, otherwise, then there probably needs to be a stipulation that if they lose a bunch of money, that we're losing money with them. And it's why I don't like clawbacks, because of that unknown down the line that gets us in trouble. So we gotta do everything we can and put as much pressure on Mr. Bushek to think this through, do his analysis, do his due diligence on our part. And then it is a little bit of a risk, I think, because you give up tax dollars. But you have to say, is it likely that we're gonna get the tax dollars that we will get? Because we don't wanna partner with somebody that's not gonna make it anyway. But that's why when he says he's got another idea, it scares me, because he's good at mitigating risk. Are you not good at mitigating risks? And he's got something up his sleeve where he can get rid of all the risk, and then in the end, it creates a whole nother avenue of what ifs, But, so, is that fairly close to what you're gonna say?
Very close, and if you eliminate tiers 2 on commercial real estate, I won't sign it. But if the city wants to go in with us and take on the risk, and when our building's sitting empty, when a 2008 market crash comes, I'd love the city to help pay for it.
I think you guys have come up with great ideas. I think we should, I'm before certainly the first thing, which is the pre-approval, because it gives us a time to regroup. You always talk about this. What can we do to make sure that at that time we look at it? And then secondly, I'm a little uncomfortable with the 5 years, but that's such a short-term commitment. At least it avoids those situations that I have seen in the news where somebody flips it, because it's a good market right now. People have flipped things, but that's because it's a good market right now. I'd be okay with 5 years, I guess. So, Councilmember, do you want to say anything?
Yeah,
Yeah, please, go ahead.
comment.
Yep.
So this dialogue is incredibly helpful, and I will hammer at this thought again and again and again, and perhaps this is, when this goes on, I think, what does my neighbor think? What do they think about this scenario? So if there's questions asked where, this dialogue just right now, okay, if sure, it makes sense to put the city in a position where we may reap a benefit by what we invest. Okay, what are the implications? And when you're negotiating with another party, like any other contract, yes, there's going to be a give and a take and a play, if you will. And I'm not sure that that is always understood from a perspective. Let me rephrase that. I think that the citizen who is watching or participating in some form deserves to understand the full picture. So when we dialogue here, whether that's with staff, with applicant, even between each other, I feel like these kind of things are so helpful to get out and make sure all of those nooks and crannies are explored. Otherwise, we can't be informed to go back to our people to tell them what we've learned, and we can't say we've really done our part. So I appreciate the dialogue, applicant, staff, mayor.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, and council. Yep, council's done a good job vetting this one. Councilmember Shields?
Thank you, Mayor. There's just one thought that I wanted to add, which is when we talk about what if they turn around and sell it for a lot more money? What if the value of this property goes up a lot? How do we benefit? Well, we benefit through our taxes. If the value of this property goes up significantly, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Bushek, that this isn't a fixed amount pilot. This is a proportion of what the county assesses, correct?
Correct. The pilot in this case is just 25% of whatever the county's valuation results in terms of taxes.
So if the value goes up significantly, so do our tax revenues. Maybe not obviously as much as the developer may benefit, but this really should be a win-win, that if this project works out well and the values go up, our tax revenues go up, the developer does well, the downtown benefits, the city benefits. So I think it's a good question to ask, but that is how our taxes are structured, and I think will be a benefit to the city.
Very good. And I'll just piggyback, and then I'll go to you, Councilmember Felker, which I would just say, I always like, if we're gonna make an investment, make it in our downtown in a blighted area. Because we've done LCRA in some pretty blighted areas that nobody even ever drives by, so. Councilmember Felker?
Thank you, Mayor. So less a comment, I do have a question. Do we have feedback from other taxing districts, and how do they're given notice of this, I presume, just by virtue of our procedure, that they're fully aware and have an opportunity to speak to the matter?
The answer is yes, they do. The statute doesn't require us to send a specific notice to the taxing district. It's only a publication notice of this hearing. But in theory, if they read the newspapers, they do have notice of this, but we've complied with the statutory requirements.
So let me be clear, so I heard that correctly. Publication just means, again, something in a newspaper.
Right.
Do other incentives actually require us to notify them? Like,
Yes, some do
actually require
Some
a
do, some
letter.
don't, is the answer.
Okay. And then, so then my follow-up question really is for the applicant. Conversations with the school district or other taxing districts, have you talked to them about the project and the abate? I mean, because they're impacted as well. We've been talking about the city, but.
We have not had any conversations. However, even, at 25%, they're going to get more than what they're currently getting.
Do I need to open the public record, Brian?
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I'm not seeing any further lights beaming at me, so let's see how this goes. Councilmember Edson, would you please read Bill number 23-054?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to advance to second reading Bill number 23-054, an ordinance approving the Ellis Glen Land Clearance for Redevelopment Authority redevelopment plan.
All right, thank you. We have a motion to move to second reading Bill number 23-054 by Councilmember Edson, seconded by Councilmember Felker. Discussion. Councilmember Felker.
Thank you. So just to be very clear, all the elements we've talked about, and this is a question for Mr. Bushek, those would be a part of the contract negotiation, not this here. Meaning we're not asking to amend anything based on our conversations about pre-approval rights, 5 years, or anything else.
No, so all the findings that you're required to make are included in the ordinance, but all of the other issues that we've discussed, sale of property and so forth, those are all contract issues that will come back at a later date.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Bushek, when are we going to have this meeting about incentives where we're going to it's going to have to be a work session where it's just all night?
April 8th, I think,
Yes.
at the
Are you making this up?
CDC.
Oh, okay. I was like, holy cow.
And we are
I
anticipating.
might have to go to a CEDC meeting just to brief myself.
And we're already anticipating even before tonight that will take more than one.
Okay,
meeting.
good, because this is too much of an engaged council to get through this in one meeting, so. Mr. Dunning, all right. All right, what about Ellis Glen, this development? Any further comment? All right, seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in, please record the vote. And it passes 6-2. All right, thank you for the tutorial, like I said, and the presentation and the investment in Lee Summit. I think we probably need a break. Let's take a recess, come back at, is that clock right? Yeah. Okay, 8:10. All right, welcome back, everyone. I'm going to bring this meeting back to order. We made it to, oh gosh, we have to do a public hearing. I have to do a public hearing for this next one, which is, I'm going to close the regular session and open the public hearing for agenda item 4B, which is sewer rates and charges. Would all those wishing to speak to this matter please rise and be sworn in by the city clerk. Mr. Eisen.
Thank you, Mayor. Scott Eisen, Chief Counsel of Infrastructure and Recreation. I'd like to start by moving to admit City's Exhibit number 1 through 3 into the evidence for the purposes of this hearing.
Please enter 1 through 3 into the court.
Tonight's public hearing is being held because under state statute, before we establish sewer fees, we're required to have a public hearing after notice is given to the public. At tonight's public hearing, there are 3 proposed sewer changes that the council will see later on tonight in the schedule of fees. The first one is the monthly sewer base charge, and the second one is the volume charge. Both of those would go into effect January 1st of 2027. The third one is going to be the sewer tap fee. That would go into effect July 1st of 2023. Again, all these are on the city's schedule of fees that will be up for hearing, should be up for an ordinance later on tonight before the council. The methodology that the city uses in order to calculate these fees are based upon the sustainability of the utility, the strategic plan, this wastewater master plan, and the city's comprehensive plan. All of these fees were approved by the Water Utilities Advisory Board, and they recommended for the approval of them and to move forward to the council. With that information, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the council has tonight.
All right, thank you. Questions? Who's the chair of that committee? Yeah. Is he? Okay.
Yes. Mr. Atchison
Okay.
is the chair.
Very good. All right, I'm not seeing any questions, Mr. Eisen. So is there anybody here that wishes to speak in favor or in opposition to this application? Please come forward. All right, any additional questions from council? Any further comment, Mr. Eisen? Councilmember Felker.
Thank you. So just to be clear, the public hearing is just to give notice that this is happening. We're actually voting on it when we talk about it in proposed ordinances from committee. That's when these matters actually are going to come forward.
That is correct. Under state statute, we're required to have a hearing before we establish those. So that's the public hearing that we're having right now that gives the public the opportunity to comment on these, and proper notice was given of it. However, we incorporate all of these fees into our schedule of fees, and that is what will be coming up later on before the council is the city's schedule of fees, and those incorporate all of these fees that were just brought forth in the public hearing.
Got it. So the public hearing is for a narrower set of fees. There's actually more that are included as the full schedule.
That is correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. All right, hearing no further testimony, I'm going to close the public hearing and reopen the regular session. Is there any council discussion on this application? Mr. Bushek, see how clean and easy Mr. Eisen makes this? I mean, he runs a tight ship. All right. See, there's no resolution to read tonight, so we will, is it next week or is it, it's not on tonight? Is it ordinance? Later, yeah. Okay. We'll get to it in a bit then. Public comments?
I have not received any public comments.
Very good. Would you please read, Tricia, would you please read Resolution 23-05?
Resolution number 23-05, a resolution authorizing the mayor to appoint successor directors to the Blue Parkway and Colburn Road Community Improvement District.
Thank you. I have a motion to adopt the resolution by Councilmember Shields, seconded by Councilmember DeMauro. Discussion? Seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. Passes 8-0. Thank you all. Takes us to proposed ordinances forwarded from committee. Councilmember Shields, would you please read Bill number 23-055?
Thank you, Mayor. I move for second reading of Bill number 23-055, an ordinance approving amendment number 11 to the budget for fiscal year ending June 30, 2023, is adopted by ordinance number 9441, ordinance number 9442, ordinance number 9449, ordinance number 9450, and ordinance number 9451 by amending the authorized expenditures to projected year amounts for the city.
All right, thank you. We have a motion to move to second reading, Bill number 23-055 by Councilmember Shields, seconded by Councilmember Edson. Discussion? Yes, Councilmember DeMauro.
I just wanted to mention that a couple of these, let's see, is this the one? Rick Gentry is the budget manager. We have two new budget managers. I just wanted to make it clear that one of these is for those type of changes. And I just want to congratulate publicly Rick, and I don't see Eric here, or I would congratulate him too. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. Passes 8-0. Councilmember Shields, would you please read for adoption?
Thank you, Mayor. I now move for adoption of Bill number 23-055, an ordinance approving amendment number 11 to the budget for fiscal year ending June 30, 2023, is adopted by ordinance number 9441, ordinance number 9442, ordinance number 9449, ordinance number 9450, and ordinance number 9451 by amending the authorized expenditures to projected year amounts for the city.
Thank you. We have a motion to adopt Bill number 23-055 by Councilmember Shields, seconded by Councilmember Hodges. Discussion? Please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. And it's adopted unanimously. Thank you. Councilmember Hodges, would you please read Bill number 23-056?
I move to second reading Bill number 23-056, an ordinance approving amendment number 12 to the budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023, as adopted by ordinance number 9441, ordinance number 9442, ordinance number 9449, ordinance number 9450, and ordinance number 9451 by amending the authorized expenditures for fire to projected year-end amounts for the city.
Thank you. We have a motion to move to second reading. Bill number 23-056 by Councilmember Hodges, seconded by Councilmember Edson. Discussion? Yes, Councilmember Pryor.
Do I need to recuse myself from this?
Mr. Head, this is the ordinance regarding authorized expenditures for fire.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Pryor is going to be recusing on this. Other discussion? Seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. Passes 7-0 with one recusal. Councilmember Hodges, would you please?
Yes. I move for the adoption of Bill number 23-056, an ordinance approving amendment number 12 to the budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023, as adopted by ordinance number 9441, ordinance number 9442, ordinance number 9449, ordinance number 9450, and ordinance number 9451 by amending the authorized expenditures for fire to projected year-end amounts for the city.
Thank you. We have a motion to adopt Bill number 23-056 by Councilmember Hodges, seconded by Councilmember Edson. Discussion? Please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. It passes 7-0 with a recusal. Councilmember DeMauro, would you please read Bill number 23-057?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to advance the second reading, Bill number 23-057, an ordinance approving amendment number 13 to the budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023, as adopted by ordinance number 9441, ordinance 9442, ordinance 9449, ordinance 9450, and ordinance 9451 by amending the authorized expenditures to projected year-end amounts for municipal court and the full-time equivalent positions for the city.
Thank you. We have a motion to move to second reading, Bill number 23-057 by Councilmember DeMauro, seconded by Councilmember Hodges. Discussion? One. All right, seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. Passes 7 in favor and 1 recusal. Councilmember DeMauro, would you please?
Yes, sir. I move for adoption, Bill number 23-057, an ordinance approving amendment number 13 to the budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023, as adopted by ordinance number 9441, ordinance number 9442, ordinance number 9449, ordinance 9450, and ordinance 9451, by amending the authorized expenditures to projected year-end amounts for municipal court and the full-time equivalent positions for the city.
Thank you. We have a motion to adopt Bill number 23-057 by Councilmember DeMauro, seconded by Councilmember Hodges. Discussion? Please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. It is adopted 7-0 with a recusal. Thank you. Councilmember Pryor, would you please read Bill number 23-058?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to advance to a second reading, Bill number 23-058, an ordinance amending Section 32-017, water tap fees of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Lee Summit, Missouri regarding water tap fees.
Thank you. We have a motion to move to second reading, Bill number 23-058 by Councilmember Pryor, seconded by Councilmember Edson. Discussion? Yes, Councilmember Felker.
Thank you, Mayor. Just maybe a quick question for whomever staff could answer. I don't know if it's Mr. Boyce. And just looking at this briefly, I think just generally speaking, the increase is not that much in terms of the water tap fee. We're not going up by very much at all.
No, sir. We're asking for go from $37.30 to $37.60 for this year for that 5/8 by 3/4 inch meter.
And we still end up, if you look at us regionally, we're kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of
That's
where
correct.
this fee is. And that's pretty much, is that pretty much an apples to apples comparison, or are there some of those that may be outliers where their fee may?
There's some differences in relation to those growth committees, or growth communities have a maybe a larger impact fee or connection fee versus those that may not have that element going on in their communities.
Yep. Great, thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
Yes, thank you. Any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. Passes 8-0. Thank you. Councilmember Pryor, would you please?
I move for adoption, Bill number 23-058, an ordinance amending Section 32-017, water tap fees of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Lee Summit, Missouri regarding water tap fees.
Thank you. We have a motion to adopt Bill number 23-058 by Councilmember Pryor, seconded by Councilmember Shields. Discussion? Please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. That bill is adopted. Councilmember Felker, would you please read Bill number 23-059?
Mayor, I'd like to move to advance to second reading Bill number 23-059, an ordinance repealing previous ordinances related to the schedule of fees and charges for the City of Lee Summit and establishing a new schedule of fees and charges to take effect July 1st, 2023 for the City of Lee Summit, Missouri.
Thank you. We have a motion to move to second reading Bill number 23-059 by Councilmember Felker, seconded by Councilmember Pryor. Discussion? Yes, Councilmember Felker.
Thank you, Mayor. Just, sorry. So again, question for staff on this. Just looking at the schedule of changes, it seems like there's more than two areas, but the primary ones would being the sewer increases, as well as then there's a significant increase in the airport. So are we just trying to catch up when it comes to the airport? There's kind of a host of fees in addition to what it's been before, so park's coming up.
Yes, Councilmember Felker, Michael Park, Director of Public Works. So we apply a typical CPI adjustment to our rates out at the airport. There is one that's a bit different, and that has to do with Hangar One's rental rates. And in that case, we're doing a little bit of catch-up to market. And so while I didn't think it was appropriate, we do a complete catch-up all in 1 year. We're trying to spread that over multiple years.
Got it. Well, again, I'm just looking at, and it looks like part of what's happening is the airport is a destination. This is an opportunity for us as we continue to draw traffic, and we need to be where, like you said, again, where the market is.
Yeah, that's the case with why the increase, the rate of increase for Hangar One is different than the others. I think the adjustment anywhere from 6 to 7% on all the other rates is fairly consistent with what we saw the other regional airports also making adjustments to their fees and rates.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Park, do you know the answer to this? Like, I saw the adoption fee for the pets. Is that pretty common?
Excuse me, the adoption fee for pets?
Yeah, is that what it says here? You find it. You know what I'm talking about?
I have no idea, Mayor, what you're talking about.
Page 3.
And I usually come up here, I'm pretty confident, I know an answer, but on this one, yeah.
Chief Forbes, save him. Is that common? Isn't it in here? I just remembered it now that we're looking at it. Page 3?
If you take me for this one.
Oh, it is, yeah, page 3, personal.
Travis
Oh, that's
Forbes,
the-
Chief of Police.
Yeah.
Were you asking if if that's common to have an adoption?
Yeah.
Fee? Yes, there are often times where that's waived, though, as well. There's special events where we waive that too, and so it's not always charged. There's opportunities to certainly adopt a dog or a cat, and if
Well,
anyone's
yeah.
interested, please let us know.
I mean, there's some dogs that are hard to, they have attitudes, and it's hard, they get adopted, and then they bring them back, and I mean,
Yes, they're a lot like people in some ways.
that's right.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah. Okay, I just found it fascinating. I know that we have a great animal shelter, and we are able to home all of our pets. So I'm glad that there's some flexibility there. All right. Any further discussion, questions? All right, seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. It passes 8-0. Thank you. Was that the first reading? Yes, it was. So, Councilmember Felker, would you please?
Mayor, I'd like to move for the adoption of Bill number 23-059, an ordinance repealing previous ordinances related to the schedule of fees and charges for the city of Lee Summit and establishing a new schedule of fees and charges to take effective July 1st, 2023 for the city of Lee Summit, Missouri.
Thank you. We have a motion to adopt Bill number 23-059 by Councilmember Felker, seconded by Councilmember Hodges. Discussion? Please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. Passes 8-0. Very good. Mayor Potem Lopez, would you please read Bill number 23-060?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. I move for second reading Bill number 23-060, an ordinance authorizing the city of Lee Summit, Missouri to waive Lee Summit Housing Authority's payment in lieu of taxes for the authority's fiscal year ending September 30th, 2022, in the estimated amount of $33,874.16.
Thank you. We have a motion to move to second reading, Bill number 23-060 by Mayor Potem Lopez, seconded by Councilmember Pryor. Discussion? I think this was a cool gesture, and I appreciate Finance and Budget bringing this forward like this. Thank you. All right, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. Moves to second reading unanimously. Mayor Potem Lopez, would you please?
The committee really appreciates your acknowledgement.
Oh, good.
So
Thank you.
Our chairman was pretty
Thank you very much.
happy over there.
Yeah.
I almost forgot to vote.
No, I mean, it's so hard divvying up this small pot of money and then,
Well,
That's good.
essentially, if I may, the Housing Authority, they have two revenue streams: rent, a prorated rent, and federal funds. So anything we can do to help them, we're glad to do.
There we go. All right, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. Passes, and it's adopted 8-0. Takes us to proposed ordinances.
No, I need to do it for adoption.
Oh, that was just first
second
reading.
reading.
Okay, moves to second reading. Mayor Potem Lopez, would you please?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. I now move for adoption of Bill number 23-060, an ordinance authorizing the city of Lee Summit, Missouri to waive the Lee Summit's Housing Authority's payment in lieu of taxes for the authority's fiscal year ending September 30th, 2022, in the estimated amount of $33,874.16.
Very good. We have a motion to adopt Bill number 23-061 by Mayor Pro Tem Lopez, seconded. I don't have a second. Did you make a motion? Councilmember Hodges is a second, okay. Any discussion? Yes, Councilmember Shields?
Thank you, Mayor. Just on our screens here, I think it's showing a different agenda item, so I just want to make sure that we're voting
Okay,
the right.
so I have a motion
the
to
right
adopt
thing.
by Mayor Pro Tem Lopez and a second by Councilmember Hodges, if you could record that into the record.
Right, for bill number 23060, so it's showing 061 on my screen anyway.
Gotcha. For bill number 23-060, yep. Thank you, Councilmember Shields. Further discussion? Yep. All right, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. Passes 8-0. Okay, now we'll go to proposed ordinances first reading. Councilmember Edson, would you please read bill number 23-061?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to advance to second reading, Bill number 23-061, an ordinance approving the Second Amendment to the real estate sale agreement between the City of Lee Summit, Missouri and Archview Properties, LLC for the sale of properties at 15 and 25 Northwest Tudor Road.
Thank you. We have a motion to move to second reading. Bill number 23-061 by Councilmember Edson, seconded by Councilmember Shields. Discussion? Seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. It does move forward to second reading unanimously. Thank you. Councilmember Hodges, would you please read bill number 23-062?
I move to advance to second reading Bill number 23-062, an ordinance authorizing the execution of an agreement between the City of Lee Summit, Missouri and McCowan Gordon Construction Company for pre-construction services for the downtown Market Plaza project.
Thank you. We have a motion to move to second reading, bill number 23-062 by Councilmember Hodges, seconded by Councilmember Pryor. Discussion? Seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. Passes 8-0. We're on our way to a farmer's market. Proposed ordinances, second reading. Councilmember Shields, would you please read bill number 23-049?
Thank you, Mayor. I move for adoption of bill number 23-049, an ordinance approving a development agreement between Blackwell 55 LLC Reserve at Blackwell LLC Residences at Blackwell LLC 120 LLC in the City of Lee Summit, Missouri for the Blackwell mixed-use development.
Thank you. We have a motion to adopt bill number 23-049 by Councilmember Shields, seconded by Councilmember Edson. Discussion? Seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. Passes 6-2. Thank you all. And committee reports. Yes, Councilmember Edson?
Thank you, Mayor. Last week, the CEDC met to talk about the Community Development Block Grant Fund for next year, or plan for next year. And I just wanted to compliment staff for helping the nonprofit applicants put their information together and the presentations that were put together. Staff and the nonprofits did a great job, and the committee did a great job trying to figure out how to take a little pot of money and help the most amount of people possible. So that will be coming before council in a couple of weeks, and we'll talk about it more then. Thank you.
Very good. It's always nice to be able to give those dollars out. Anybody else for committee reports? Okay, council comments? Yes, Councilmember Shields?
Thank you, Mayor. I've gotten a couple of questions from constituents about when the new commissions will be coming online and when we'll be appointing for the Cultural Commission and I forget what the Health and Wellness, is that what we're calling the other one? So I just wondered if you or if staff might be able to just speak briefly to what the timeline is looking like for getting those up and running.
Man, you should have prepared me for that one. Yes, I had a meeting with staff this week and went through the applications, and it was really hard. There's a lot of new names, a lot of new interests, and some of their resumes are super impressive. So traditionally, I have taken the time to call and visit with and interview anybody that wants to be on a committee that we would consider appointing. I've got a lot of phone calls to make, and I would like to get started on it, but I have to, we're talking, one of them had 30 applicants or more, and you all said I could only appoint 13 with your approval, so that makes it a little bit of a challenge. But there are some that really stand out, and I will, just so you know, the types of things I ask them is make sure that they are going to be committed, because we'd have new rules too. They have to, you can't just not show up to meetings anymore. We're going to work this hard, and we're going to provide staff resources. Then we need committed individuals. And then I do always try to at least keep in mind the diversity of, male, female, at least at a minimum. I try to keep it, it's not like I'm going to say 50-50 every single perfectly. I want to get the best applicants on there, but I will try to at least do that. And then just try to get strategic thinkers. But I was just really impressed. Mr. Dunning, were you impressed with the resumes that we got especially for the one with the wellness, was it? Oh my gosh,
Out of a lot
it was
of
amazing.
interest. Broad backgrounds, just like you said, a good mix of backgrounds. So yeah, it's a lot of interested and passionate citizens in both those areas.
So I will start making those phone calls right away, there may come a point where I don't want to we don't want to come in here and have me say, well, here's 20, help me get to 13, and then we're debating people. It's just not really appropriate to do that in here. But you never know, I might. The other thing is that I'll do everything I can to diversify by district, because that seems to also be important. But I am telling you, this is weird. When I looked at one of the committees, there were 3 times as many people that applied from District 2 as any other. And it's been that way for the last few years. That's where a lot of the newer, I suppose, that the newer homes are, and so you've got people that are wanting to get engaged, and District 2 has a lot of applicants. So I'll do my best to keep it broad and make sure everybody's represented, but it really gets challenging when you've got fantastic people from one district, and you're going to rule one out because you're trying to, But there's always other commissions, and there's always opportunities in the future to roll onto a commission if somebody leaves. So it all works out. Can you give me another week or so and tell you how I'm doing? 2 weeks, maybe? All right. Good question. I've also got caught up on most of the other applications, or not applications, boards and commissions. We had a few positions open up, and I've given them to, I've appointed and given them to legal to put onto future council. So, all right, any other comments? All right, staff roundtable.
Mayor, we have a written report on the downtown market plaza, but this is a good time to turn it over to Ryan Elam to share a few remarks and where we're at, status report, and talk a little bit about an approach to clearing of the sites over there. So I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Mark. Mayor, members of the council, Ryan Elam, Assistant City Manager. I don't want to completely reread the report that's in your packet, but I did think it was important right now to just touch on a few high-level items. One, the design has kicked off. We kicked that process off, and we're moving along pretty swiftly in that overall process. And we are expecting to come back in April timeframe with kind of a schematic design package for presentation to the city council at that time. One of the other big items is the ice house and the demolition of the structures that are currently there. We've done a kind of an extensive effort of looking at what is salvageable, what is historical, and how things can be reused. When the city council provided direction to move in to a demolition mode with that structure based off of the feasibility of reuse of that being not that great, is really when we started digging a little deeper into that. Through all that, we've discovered that a lot of the stone, to try to salvage that stone is incredibly difficult. It doesn't hold up to the paint removal process through a number of different methods without being very, very costly, as well as the storage of the stone and how to use that stone in the future. So McCown Gordon has provided two kind of estimates right now for the demolition there, and they were included in your packet. And our recommendation at this point is to go with I'm going to call it the minimal salvage opportunity. It's still commemorating the ice house and the location, saving the key elements being the 1896 keystone. If you look at it, it says built by A.J. Hess and Sons, 1896 on there. That's definitely a salvageable piece. Some of the wood and metal in the structure can be utilized within some of the other structures, but any use of those materials kind of outside and throughout the site is pretty limited. And so our recommendation is to move forward with photographic commemoration, and more than just, out there with a cell phone camera, and some nice nice photos for historical documentation purposes, similar to what you would do through a historic preservation, a state SHPA, State Historic Preservation Association Commission process that we would use for that, with a higher quality architectural photos and things like that, as well as work on some sort of interpretive piece for that. So wanted to bring that before the council and just see feedback on that and let you know the direction that we were heading based off of the facts that we have in front of us today.
All right, thank you. Councilmember DeMoro?
Thank you, Mayor. Ryan, I have a question. In the demo language here, there's two options, and I do support going with the minimal salvage. But can you explain the difference between minimum bracing and extensive bracing? Because I didn't quite understand where they were going with that.
I was just looking around to see if Arlen was still here by chance, but really what they mean by is how much you have to support the walls during the demolition process. So you can't just, if you have minimal bracing to that, that means you don't have to add a lot of extra structure in order to hold the wall up while you take it down. Extensive bracing means that you essentially have to kind of construct something else to hold the wall up while you then individually pick it down because the wall wouldn't be able to support itself. So really it's the level of work that you have to do in order to actually then perform the work.
So to keep the walls in a demolition falling down costs more money, which seems counterintuitive to me.
That the reason for that is if you're going to deconstruct it to try to salvage those materials, you're more concerned with how they fall and how they're in the condition they are whenever you actually demo them. If you have minimal bracing and you're not trying to save every stone, then I'm going to use really simple terms. It's not quite this simple, but you can knock the wall over and not worry about it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Shields?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say that I appreciate the fact that we looked into this, that we looked at these different options, but I can understand why we're going the minimal salvage route. I think that makes the most sense, and I appreciate that we'll do the historic documentation. I know we had kind of a long discussion at council about the ice house and the disposition of it and how we could commemorate it, so I think we're doing the best that we can with the resources that we have, and I would support moving forward with that more limited option.
Yep. Thank you. All right. Yes, Councilmember Felker.
Well, I guess if you're looking for direction, I just want to echo that.
Yes.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Is that it, Mr. Denning? Okay. Well, we're going to go into a closed session. I would need some help with that. Yes, Councilmember DeMoro.
Thank you, Mayor. Pursuant to Section 610021, operational guidelines, policy, and specific response plans developed, adopted, or maintained by any public agency responsible for law enforcement, public safety, first response, or public health for use in responding to or preventing any critical incident which is or appears to be terrorist in nature and which has the potential to endanger individual or public safety or health. I move for closed session.
Second?
Okay, I have a motion to move into closed session by Councilmember DeMauro, seconded by Councilmember Shields, I believe. I'm not sure who was on my right. Discussion? For those employees that thought this was going to be, you were going to be going home around, 8 or 7 or something like that, you thought wrong. You should know better than that. No, I'm sorry. You guys have a great night. Can I get a roll call?
Councilmember DeMauro.
Aye.
Councilmember Shields. Member Edson.
Aye.
Councilmember Hodges.
Aye.
Councilmember Pryor.
Aye.
Councilmember Felker.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Lopez.
Aye.
Mayor Baird.
Aye. Thank you all.